Hello, good evening everyone. I'm back again today with another important topic as part of our 50 days YouTube live sessions that we have been conducting for all of you UPSC and APSC aspirants so as to help you in your preparation of mains. And as you are already familiar with me now that I have been bringing topics from exclusively from GS-II paper, right? Though my specialization is in political science and international relations optional, and I also teach ethics paper and GS-II paper, that is my specialization. And in this YouTube live sessions I have been basically covering topics from GS-II paper. So in that series, today I have come up with another important and interesting topic, and the title of the topic is role of NGOs and self-help groups, non-governmental organizations and self-help groups. So I'm going to basically discuss role of NGOs and self-help groups in inclusive governance and social development. Without wasting much time, let us straight away come. And this is again the topic that I have highlighted. So in today's era, we talk about inclusive governance. We need to talk about development from the social perspective also. And I will, in the course of our discussion, I will briefly capture, all of that. But essentially, we are going to basically discuss the tremendous role, tremendous potential that the NGOs or the self-help groups have with regard to contributing effectively in our developmental paradigm. So basically हम जो आज का जो विषय है उसमें हम क्या करने वाले हैं, एनजीओ और सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स जो है उनकी जो भूमिका है हमारे देश के डेवलपमेंट में, विकास के प्रक्रिया में कैसे एनजीओ और सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप एक महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभा सकते हैं, लेकिन उसके साथ साथ क्या चुनौतियां हैं, कौन सी ऐसी चुनौतियां हैं जिनका ये सामना करते हैं और किस प्रकार के रिफॉर्म्स की हमें जरूरत है. सो इन सारे बिंदुओं पे प्रकाश डालते हुए हम इस GS-II के इस पेपर को आज के इस YouTube लाइव सेशन में कवर करने वाले हैं. तो बड़ा ही इंटरेस्टिंग और रोचक होने वाला है ये एंटायर डिस्कशन. बने रहिए मेरे साथ अंत तक. और सबसे पहले what you can do is that you can just subscribe to the CSAP IAS Academy's YouTube channel. You can like this video and you can also post your comments in the course of our discussion. You can you can drop your feedbacks, comments, or you can even ask questions that you would like to ask from us. So straight away, let us now come to the point of defining self-help groups and NGOs. As you know, these self-help groups are basically the grassroots collectives, okay, primarily women-led, though there can be men-led self-help group also, but essentially there has been this presence of women-led self-help groups which are actually fostering economic self-reliance through savings, credit access and skill building. तो इन सारे प्रक्रिया को माध्यम से ये जो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स है, what we in Assamese call आत्मसहाय गुट है, ये आत्मसहाय गुट बिलाकर केनेके how are they basically trying to contribute and empower the marginalized communities, particularly in the rural areas, and what has been the significant contribution of this self-help groups. And on the other hand, the non-governmental organizations are the independent entities basically driving social change through advocacy, service delivery and policy influence. So basically they also complement state efforts in development. Of course, the state has the primary responsibility of taking forward the development in our country, but many a times there are certain gaps which are left in the course of this developmental journey. Now this gap is basically being attempted to be filled by forums like and the bodies like NGOs, okay, and sometimes you have the self-help groups which also creates innovative ways of bringing about certain transformation in the remote areas, particularly the women-centric, and therefore it also complements some of the important sustainable development goals, okay. So the self-help groups and non-governmental organizations, now we can say that they collectively basically foster inclusive governance. So in today's time we talk about, there are certain important terminologies that we need to be basically familiar with. आज के दौर में कुछ महत्वपूर्ण टर्मिनोलॉजीज को, विशेष शब्दावली के ऊपर में हमें ध्यान देना पड़ता है। और क्योंकि जब भी हम गवर्नेंस की बात करते हैं, जैसे इससे पहले हमने जो YouTube लाइव सेशन किया था उसमें मैंने गुड गवर्नेंस के ऊपर में डिटेल में एक डिस्कशन किया था, तो अगर आपको उसके बारे में जानना हो तो आप CSAP IAS Academy की YouTube चैनल पे जा सकते हैं और गुड गवर्नेंस का टॉपिक टाइप कर सकते हैं, एंड देन यू विल गेट that the link of that particular video. तो जैसे कि आज हम गवर्नेंस की बात करते हैं तो हमको एसेंशियली गुड गवर्नेंस की बात करनी पड़ेगी, एथिकल गवर्नेंस की बात करनी पड़ेगी। वैसे ही जब हम गवर्नेंस की बात करते हैं तो हमें पार्टिसिपेटरी गवर्नेंस की बात करनी पड़ेगी, राइट? और हमें उससे भी हमें और भी इंपॉर्टेंट ये है कि हमें इंक्लूसिव गवर्नेंस की बात करनी पड़ेगी। तो पूरा जो प्रशासन व्यवस्था है उसको आज के दौर में इंक्लूसिव बनाने की जरूरत है। So the governance actually needs to be both participatory and inclusive, whereby it can actually incorporate all the segments of the society within its fold and actually promote the welfare of all the sections of the society. Okay, so that is why the governance basically needs to be inclusive, and in making the governance inclusive, the contribution of the self-help group and NGOs is very, very critical. So they basically play a very instrumental role, and they also empower the marginalized communities. So marginalized communities के empowerment में भी उनका बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण योगदान है, and therefore they also drive sustainable socio-economic development. Now you see, whenever we talk about development, whenever we talk about environment, the another key word, the terminology that we use is sustainable. So we need development, but this model of development also we need to talk about. So India needs development. We need to develop. We need to become a developed state. हम विकसित भारत तो बनना चाहते हैं, लेकिन उस मॉडल ऑफ विकसित भारत का, what would be that model of that development of that विकसित भारत? तो हमारा मॉडल ऑफ डेवलपमेंट क्या होगा? So that actually needs to be sustainable. Okay. Now their synergy basically promotes participatory democracy. You see, I already told that how, when we talk about the concepts like, governance or democracy, some of the terminologies become very, very important. For example, when we talk about participation, in today's era, we just not only talk about participation, but we talk about informed participation. And for that, the adequate flow of information becomes extremely critical, so that the citizens can participate in an informed manner in the entire governance प्रक्रिया, right? So पूरे प्रशासन प्रक्रिया में नागरिक जो है informed citizen की तरह ताकि participate करे, उसके लिए सूचना का विराजमान होना बहुत ही जरूरी होता है। और इसी कड़ी में हमने कई महत्वपूर्ण कदम उठाए, जैसे आप RTI का उदाहरण के तौर पे सोच सकते हैं। और क्योंकि हम RTI का बात कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि हम NGOs की बात कर रहे हैं, तो जाहिर सी बात है हम इन दोनों को बाद में लिंक करके भी देखेंगे। तो यानी कि basically in order to promote the participatory governance and in amplifying citizen voices, the grievances, the aspirations, the needs, of the citizens, the poor and the marginalized sections of the citizens, articulating their grievances, उनकी जो समस्याएं हैं, उनके जो शिकायतें हैं, उनको एक आवाज देना, उनको एक बुलंदी देना और उनको स्टेट के सामने, राज्य के सामने सही तरीके से रखना, ये सारा काम जो है कहीं ना कहीं एनजीओज और सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप के माध्यम से एक सिनर्जी के थ्रू से और भी बेहतर तरीके से हम रख सकते हैं, राइट? बाय एड्रेसिंग सिस्टमिक इश्यूज लाइक करप्शन एंड इनइक्वालिटी। ना उसके साथ साथ हमारे देश के जो गवर्नेंस, और केवल हमारे देश के ही नहीं बल्कि ये तो ग्लोबल फेनोमेना है। इनफैक्ट बहुत शुरुआती दौर पे अगर आप देखेंगे, जब प्लेटो when he was studying the political systems, political orders of the society, then he also identified these problems, like for example corruption, and he also talked about corruption and nepotism. So similarly, we also in our governance, today's governance, or the today's system, we have corruption, inequality. Now we need to address this. This is very, very critical for all of us, because this is also the constitution's mandate, right? So we need to address this inequality. Okay, so self-help groups and NGOs basically strengthen democratic institutions for equitable growth. So in order to ensure that, to promote the equitable growth, so as to reduce the inequalities prevailing in our society, whether our institutions are functioning accordingly or not, to put a check on that, the self-help groups and the NGOs can actually play a very vital role in that regard. Okay. Now, they are therefore, the self-help groups and NGOs therefore can be seen as the pillars of the, inclusive development in India. So they can foster this concept of inclusive development, right? And they not only, this inclusion can be seen in many dimensions. For example, one of the key aspect is the financial inclusion, Vittiya inclusion, right? So, and gender empowerment, you see, so women have been historically lagging behind. They have not been, given that right type of opportunities have not been created for them to participate. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we undo that situation? How do we correct those historical injustices? How do we facilitate the effective participation of women? Okay, and how do we promote their leadership? So in order to do that, this self-help groups have basically contributed in a very significant way by promoting or focusing on financial inclusion of women and thereby contributing to the gender empowerment, the concept of gender empowerment. Okay, so NGOs have also, on the other hand, they have bridged the governance gaps by delivering services like, for example, healthcare, education. तो कई मामलों में जहां पे सरकार जो है स्वास्थ्य और शिक्षा के ऊपर में सही तरीके से बेहतरीन तरीके से सारे मार्जिनलाइज लोगों के लिए और कुछ मुश्किल टेरेन्स में, ऐसे जगह पे, दुर्गम जगह पे जहां पे सरकार की इन व्यवस्था बहुत बेहतरीन तरीके से नहीं पहुंच पाए हैं, कैसे वहां पे एनजीओस दे कैन बेसिकली intervene and bring about a transformation by focusing on basic requirements like healthcare and education, and therefore they will be advocating systematic reforms like, for example, RTI on the other hand. तो एक तरफ तो हेल्थ और एजुकेशन जैसे प्राइमरी सेक्टर महत्वपूर्ण बिंदुओं पे काम करके, और दूसरी तरफ बहुत सारे ऐसे प्रगतिशील कानून की मांग करते हुए, जैसे कि RTI, for example, which was led by Aruna Roy and others, various civil society and the NGOs basically joined in the movement, in launching this movement, demanding greater transparency and demanding such a law which actually gives power to the citizens to access information from the public offices. So in doing so, they have actually promoted this concept of both transparency and accountability. You see, so whenever the governance can be promoted, when the governance can be made transparent and accountable, it is more likely to serve the interests of the poor and the marginalized sections of the society as per the mandate of the constitution. And it is in this context that we need to duly acknowledge the role and significant contribution of both self-help groups and the NGOs. Now, together they basically amplify citizen voices, as I already pointed out, strengthen participatory democracy. So their critical role is in strengthening this participatory democracy, and we have seen this how through the Panchayati Raj institutions, and they have also been effectively addressed, effectively been able to address some of the challenges like poverty and inequality. Okay, particularly because they have been working effectively in the rural areas. तो जहां पे ये गरीबी, भूखमरी और असमानता इतनी ज्यादा मात्रा में विराजमान है कि कैसे एनजीओज और सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स के कॉम्बाइंड एफर्ट के तहत, कॉम्बाइंड उस प्रयास के तहत पॉवर्टी और इनइक्वालिटीज के ऊपर जा सकता है और उसको दूर किया जा सकता है, उस दिशा में सही कदम बढ़ाने में both NGOs and the self-help groups have basically played a significant role. Now, let us talk about the conceptual framework of inclusive governance. Because we have been talking about this inclusive governance, we hear these terminologies, inclusive governance, participatory governance. Now, what is this inclusive governance? So, basically, inclusive governance prioritizes equity, accountability, and citizen participation. Okay, so the citizens should not only be a mute spectator in the functioning of the governance, but the citizens should be able to actively participate in the everyday governance. That is very much critical. Okay, and this is essential for sustainable development in India's diverse socio-economic context. So we have a diverse socio-economic context. इतनी ज्यादा आर्थिक सामाजिक विविधताएं हैं हमारे देश में, राइट? तो ऐसे में हर समाज, हर वर्ग की रिक्वायरमेंट्स अलग अलग है, उनकी समस्याएं अलग अलग है. तो इसीलिए उन सारे लोगों का गवर्नेंस के उस प्रक्रिया में, प्रशासन के उस प्रक्रिया में उन सभी लोगों का भागीदारी सुनिश्चित करना बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है, ताकि पॉलिसीज जो है वो इंक्लूसिव बने, सारे लोगों के हित को ध्यान में रखते हुए पॉलिसी निर्माण का कार्य किया जा सके, उसके लिए ये बहुत ही जरूरी हो जाता है हमारे लिए ये सुनिश्चित करना कि जो है एंटायर गवर्नेंस एक्चुअली बिकम्स इंक्लूसिव। उसके साथ साथ अगर हम देखते हैं तो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स बेसिकली वुमेन्स के एम्पावरमेंट में, जैसे हमने कहा, थ्रू कलेक्टिव सेविंग्स, क्रेडिट, व्हाइल एनजीओज एडवोकेट फॉर ट्रांसपेरेंसी एंड सिस्टमिक रिफॉर्म्स, उसके तहत तो एक तरफ जहां सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स ने वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट के ऊपर, फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन के ऊपर में ज्यादा से ज्यादा बल दिया है, दूसरी तरफ एनजीओज जो है वो सिस्टेमिक रिफॉर्म्स पे बहुत ज्यादा जोर देते हैं। गवर्नमेंट के जो whatever the flaws are there, they are able to identify, they are able to prioritize some of the priorities of the government, for example healthcare, education and so on and so forth। तो इस प्रकार से जो है दोनों का एक साझा प्रयास के तहत में काफी सारी चीजें हमारे देश में बेहतर बनाने में इन दोनों का महत्वपूर्ण योगदान है। Now, so similarly, this National Rural Livelihood, Mission and NABARD's basically, self-help group bank linkage program have scaled financial inclusion. Okay, so NGOs on the other hand have bridged the citizen, state citizen gaps. So there is generally this gap between the state and the citizen. राज्य और नागरिक के बीच में जो गैप रह जाता है, उस गैप को फिल अप करने का काम एनजीओज करते हैं, राइट, थ्रू द सर्विस डिलीवरी एंड पॉलिसी एडवोकेसी। तो एनजीओ केवल सर्विसेज डिलीवर नहीं करते हैं, जैसे कि हमने कहा हेल्थ केयर, एजुकेशन, ये सारी केवल सर्विसेज डिलीवर नहीं करते, कई बार वो पॉलिसी एडवोकेसी भी करते हैं, कई बार पॉलिसी निर्माण में उनका बहुत बड़ा योगदान होता है, क्योंकि दे बेसिकली लॉन्च ए कंटिन्यूअस एंड सस्टेन्ड एफर्ट in that direction to make certain some of the demands. Now aligning with, for example, sustainable development goal number 1, no poverty. For example, how to eradicate poverty, how to create a situation where there is no poverty in the society. In order to move towards the achievement of these first sustainable development goals, the collective and combined effort of self-help groups and the NGOs cannot be ignored. Okay. And also with regard to gender equality, reducing inequalities. Okay, so in all of that, so whether it is it is about addressing poverty, whether it is about promoting gender equality, or it is about reducing inequalities in the prevailing in the society, also as per the mandate of the Indian Constitution. So they have been also contributing significantly in taking India towards that particular goal, which is actually also the vision of our constitution, because our constitution envisages a society which is based on justice, where there is equality. Okay, so but then again challenges like corruption and regional disparities necessitate evidence based reforms for sustainable progress. Okay, now you have now the importance of inclusive governance. Now this inclusive governance basically ensures equitable resource distribution and basically amplifies marginalized voices, strengthening democratic institutions. When the the voices of the marginalized sections are articulated by the NGOs, they basically empower them, they provide them more avenues to participate in the everyday governance process. Similarly, self-help groups then enable women to lead Panchayati Raj institutions. Now, by participating in the self-help groups, the meetings of the self-help groups, the women are able to come out of the four walls, whether of the household or the kitchen. They are able to participate in the decision-making processes of that self-help groups. Now, of course, there would be limitation when they will be first stepping out of their house and participating in those forums. But nonetheless, even if it is symbolically, it is more than symbolically, but I am saying that even if it is symbolically, then that symbol itself is a very powerful symbol. And we must acknowledge the role of self-help groups in that sense, creating a situation of empowerment for women. Okay. NGOs also basically facilitate policy dialogue, ensuring grassroots needs shape legislations. So how, based on the grassroots requirements, the demands from the grassroots level, why the policies or the laws should be formulated as per the requirements coming from the grassroots level, and the NGOs, by articulating, by raising those grassroots demands in a more systematic and sustained manner, they give voice to those marginalized communities. For example, the introduction or the promulgation of Forest Rights Act is a result of that sustained effort by the various NGOs. For example, Campaign for Survival and Dignity. Okay, this is a coalition which played an instrumental role in mobilizing tribal activists, leading to the Forest Rights Act, in 2006, which was passed in 2006 through mass movements and demanding forest rights. So you see, the NGOs, are working at the grassroots level, and they have been articulating the grievances, the aspirations of the people from the grassroots level, and they are many a times been very effective in channelizing these demands and actually resulting in certain laws, like for example Forest Rights Act, for example Right to Information Act. Okay, so we have seen during this first UPA 1, many such progressive laws were actually initiated. For example, Right to Information Act in 2005, Forest Rights Act in 2006. But in doing so, the role of the NGOs was immense. They played a very critical role. A sustained effort, a continuous struggle by the various NGOs coming together, only resulted in bringing about such laws as per the aspirations of the marginalized and the tribals of our country. Okay, so the efforts to counter systematic corruption, emphasizing institutional trust as a development cornerstone. You see, the trust in the institution, to maintain that faith in the institution is very much important for all of us, because if India has to progress, if we are to develop, our institution must reflect that trust, okay, which the Constitution has also imposed upon them. For example, recently the Election Commission of India is under scanner, right? And as the constitutional body, it actually becomes the responsibility of the Election Commission of India to come forward and do everything, upholding transparency, so as to again ensure that public's faith or trust is not lost in the institution of Election Commission of India. It is very, very critical for us to maintain people's faith in the institutions, and we can only develop when our institutions actually perform their role as per as the way it has been assigned. Of course, in promoting this inclusive governance, as we all say that e-governance model, the adoption of the technologies, okay, can play a very instrumental role in promoting the concept of inclusive governance. Okay, in that context, we have the Seva Setu platform, which has processed more than 1.5 crore applications with great disposable rate of more than 85%, which is basically telling a story that technology driven accountability can be a way forward. And Assam in that context has actually led by initiating initiatives like the Seva Setu, which has actually made the various service delivery mechanism not just efficient but very transparent. Okay, and this is what the inclusive governance basically needs to make the processes much more easier. Remember, I discussed when we talked about the governance and good governance, there I also talked about the smart governance. So in that smart, I said S stands for simple. Okay, so the process also needs to be made simple. Okay, and of course accountability, responsiveness, transparency, etc. are very, very important. Now, when we try to look at the historical evolution of the self-help groups in India, then of course this Seva becomes very important. And from that, a collective organization of women workers focusing on livelihood, security and credit access. So experiments by NGOs in Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka laid the foundation of informal savings and credit groups. Institutionalization through NABARD in 1992, as you all know, that the launch of self-help group bank linkage program. So this has been a very historical turning point in India's, financial inclusion in that sense. Okay, by NABARD in 1992, it marked a turning point, and it has since grown into the world's largest microfinance institutions, initiative. connecting self-help groups with formal banking institutions. So you see, so whatever the limitations of the self-help groups were there, that they did not have the adequate flow of fund. So without the adequate flow of fund, how do you bring about that social change? How do you address the problems of poverty, inequality? Okay, because you are not able to start some means of livelihood when you are not able to access greater amount of as the loan. So that weakness was adequately addressed through this initiative, like self-help group bank linkage program, um, um, which was initiated by NABARD in 1992. So, and it has in that sense become a very turning point. So NABARD, so the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, launched in 2011, has mobilized more than 9 crore women into self-help group, okay, and promoting financial inclusion. So this way we have seen that how the financial inclusion has been greatly promoted. Initiatives like coming from either NABARD and such efforts coming from various financial institutions, which have greatly collaborated with the self-help groups and assisted and provided grants, loans to the self-help groups, and this has actually played a very historic and turning point in gender relations also, and in giving women more say in the financial matters as well. However, there are certain limitations, but but nonetheless, these initiatives have played a very critical role. Okay. Now, historical evolution of as we have been talking about, self-help groups have also evolved from the informal thrift groups into structured, okay, federated institutions linked with banks, cooperatives, and micro enterprises. So you see, from those informal groups, now they have gained the proper structure has actually developed. So there has been more systematization of these self-help groups. So alignment with PM Kaushal Vikas Yojana, Manrega, and social welfare schemes enhances skill development, credit access, and entrepreneurship. You see, so how by integrating with other schemes, government schemes, these self-help groups have also in that sense collectively created that environment whereby the development, and when we say development, it's not just in the economic sense. We are not just looking at the GDP, we are not just looking at the rising Sensex or the tall buildings and flyovers and so on and so forth, but we are also looking at development from the social point of view. Okay, we are also focusing on gender relation, for example. Okay, so therefore in contributing, in bringing about that transformation and taking India to that path of development, they have collectively played a very, very important role. Self-help groups have become instruments of rural poverty alleviation. You see, किस प्रकार से self-help groups, Atma Sahay Gut, how they have actually become an instrument of rural poverty alleviation. So in order to address the poverty at the grassroots level, at the rural level, they have actually, in the absence of, these self-help groups also, there was this, greater need of money. But the poor and the needy people in the rural areas were deprived of the, conventional banking, services, because they lacked those resources, documents, and so on and so forth. So the self-help group at that particular juncture played an instrumental role by making the processes much more easier. And what has been an turning point is the linkages of self-help groups with the banking institutions, through the NABARD's initiatives. Now they have also in that sense reduced the dependence on informal money lenders. Earlier they had to rely on the informal money lenders, who actually used to charge a lot of interest rate, and it used to be all the more problematic for the poor and the needy people, those who needed the money the most, those who were the most vulnerable, helpless. They were actually charged the highest rate of interest. That was the irony. But the self-help groups actually redefined this. It has actually opened up more avenues for the rural population, though I mean there is yet lot to be done in this regard, but nonetheless this is a very very good initiative in the right direction. That is what we can say. So Seva's grassroots mobilization in the 1970s to the institutionalized framework under this day National Rural Livelihood Mission. Today, India's self-help group basically movement has transformed into a global model of community-led development. It has actually now become a global, example. You see how a community-led development model can be initiated, which basically promotes and fosters financial inclusion and also contributes to the concept of women empowerment, thereby effectively contributing to one of the most important sustainable development goals of gender equality. Now, self-help groups, as I have already pointed out, played a very instrumental role in the financial inclusion. Okay, तो वित्तीय इंक्लूजन के मामले में सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स का एक महत्वपूर्ण योगदान रहा है. They basically provide credit and saving access, reducing reliance on exploitative money lenders. Okay, तो बैंक के साथ जैसे ही हमने लिंक किया तो lot of money was dispersed. women led self help groups basically empower communities for economic stability. तो आर्थिक स्थिरता लाने में, उनकी आर्थिक हालत को सुधारने में सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स का एक खासा महत्व रहा है, राइट. तो पॉवर्टी को एड्रेस करने में, नो पॉवर्टी, इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ को, और उसके साथ साथ हमारा जो सपना है विकसित भारत का, जो सपना हमने देखा है 2047 तक विकसित भारत जो हम बनेंगे, तो वो किस प्रकार का विकसित भारत होगा, राइट. क्या वो वही जहां पे गरीबी होगा, जहां पे जेंडर डिस्क्रिमिनेशन प्रिवेल करेगा? ऐसा तो नहीं हो सकता. तो जाहिर सी बात है हमें उन सारे बिंदुओं पे काम करना होगा, और उन सारे बिंदुओं पे काम करना, हालांकि यद्यपि ये स्टेट की जिम्मेदारी है, राज्य की ये प्राथमिकता होनी चाहिए, लेकिन बावजूद उसके राज्य की प्राथमिकता के होने के बावजूद कई बार हमने देखा है कि द स्टेट इन इटसेल्फ इज नॉट एबल टू cater to the diverse needs of the society, and in those moments we cannot leave those people abandoned. So there the role of the self help groups and the NGOs actually becomes critical, and it is in this context that we must acknowledge their due contribution in taking the developmental journey forward. So women's empowerment के बारे में हमने already जिक्र कर लिया है. कुदुम्बश्री ये केरला का एग्जाम्पल आप देख सकते हैं. नाउ सिमिलरली कॉन्फ्लिक्ट और सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप या एनजीओज में काम करते वक्त दे आल्सो लर्न सर्टेन स्किल्स अबाउट फाइनेंशियल मैनेजमेंट. अभी तक पैसे के लेन देन के मामले में महिलाएं बिल्कुल ही अभिज्ञ थी, because they never had an exposure with regard to management of money. So obviously, as the first time, or often, as I often repeatedly point out, whenever you are the first generation learner, you will always have struggles, you will always have your own difficulties, but it is through those struggles that you will evolve. So women have also been facing those difficulties with regard to the financial management, but nonetheless it is a very good move in the right direction. They need to struggle in order to evolve, in order to acquire that expertise with regard to handling of money. But that step itself, that one, their financial inclusion, second, their leadership in the financial management, in managing the money, is very critical, because once women know about this financial management, it will not just be an individual skill for the women, but the entire family actually will benefit from that skill, from that knowledge that the women will acquire. That's why it is a very critical, it is a very revolutionary step in that context. So alignment with sustainable development goal, gender equality, addresses systemic inequalities. Okay, and self-help groups led campaigns on education and health, improve literacy and maternal health, creating a multiplier effect. You see, and the society will also be able to benefit. So self-help groups and livelihood promotion. So how the self-help groups actually promoted the livelihood programs? They have supported micro enterprises in agriculture, handicrafts, small businesses, and they have reduced agrarian income dependency, so that the rural population no longer depend on the agriculture income, but they can also start some of the livelihood mechanisms, because these self-help groups would provide them the loans at a very low interest, and that will be a game changer for them. Okay, so livelihood missions. So Sevas handicraft cooperatives promote entrepreneurship and economic resilience. You see, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana also enhances employability, ensuring long-term economic stability. And similarly, focus on sustainable livelihood actually strengthens community resilience which will only be able to promote the concept of Viksit Bharat. So if we are to become that Viksit Bharat, then of course those measures become very critical for all of us. Now self-help group and social transformation, मूलतः एक सामाजिक बदलाव, सामाजिक क्रांति, राइट, तो लाने में सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स का भी महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका रहा है. सो कॉम्बैट इश्यूज लाइक डाउरी, एल्कोहलिज्म एंड जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस. तो महिला से संबंधित जो भी समस्याएं हैं, चाहे वो डाउरी का समस्या हो, दहेज उत्पीड़न का समस्या हो, एल्कोहलिज्म, दारू या नशा के खिलाफ जो अभियान चलाने का मुहिम हो, राइट, जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस, इन सब के मामले में सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स के महिलाओं ने एक साथ मिलकर कई सारे ऐसे कदम उठाए और कई सारे ऐसे उदाहरण हमारे देश में मौजूद है. तो इसीलिए the self-help groups have actually greatly contributed in bringing about this social transformation. समाज में एक बदलाव लाने में उनका खासा महत्व रहा है. Campaigns improve, literacy, healthcare access and family planning. You see, क्योंकि जैसे ही आप महिला को इन leadership skills देते हैं, तो family planning, the women which had so far had no control, whether it is the production or the reproduction, right? It has always been the male who have been exercising control, dominating over it. Now the women, because of such exposure, will be able to have greater understanding about the importance of literacy. She will focus on healthcare, they will focus on family planning, they will gain more agency, they will have the decision making power, and all of this would be a game changer. All of this would not only just bring about a change in her personal life, but it will effectively bring about a change in the society. It will also combat the patriarchal mindset. Okay. So Tamil Nadu, for example, you have self-help group led anti-alcoholism initiatives. Okay. So how they have basically taken such initiatives to bring about that change in the society. Okay. Grassroots approach builds social capital, fostering trust and cooperation. And also at the grassroots level, you have this cooperation. Okay. Collective functioning, okay, is also enhanced by participating through self-help groups, and focus on education and health campaigns address systemic inequalities. Okay, and this also aligns with Amartya Sen's capability approach. Okay, so we need to focus on developing those capabilities. So the citizens should not just be a recipient of the various services by the state, but effectively we should focus on developing the capabilities of the citizens, so that the citizens can greatly enjoy and exercise their rights. Okay, so participatory governance, as I already said, that it also strengthens participatory democracy. It also fosters a collective governance, promotes participatory democracy. And in Rajasthan, this self-help group led basically Panchayati Raj initiatives demonstrate improved governance outcomes. So whenever you have self-help group led Panchayati Raj initiatives, the performance, the governance has actually performed much more better. So these are the critical examples. Okay, women's voices ensuring inclusive decision making and resilient institutions. So when women are also women's voices also find a place in the entire governance sections, then the governance actually in the true sense of the term becomes inclusive. वरना क्या होता था, अभी तक आधा आबादी कहीं ना कहीं उस पूरे गवर्नेंस प्रक्रिया से, उस पूरे प्रशासन प्रक्रिया से बाहर था. तो कहीं ना कहीं सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप उन आधे आबादी का प्रतिनिधित्व करने में, उनको एक से देने में, उनको आवाज देने में, उनको एक बुलंदी से अपनी बातें रखने में कहीं ना कहीं एक अवसर प्रदान करता है. ऑफ कोर्स जैसे हमने कहा कि बहुत सारे प्रॉब्लम्स हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल लिमिटेड फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी. अब अगर सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप को अगर काम करना है, इफ दे आर टू एड्रेस द रूरल पॉवर्टी, इनइक्वालिटीज एंड सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ, बट कहीं ना कहीं उन सारे कामों को करने के लिए, वो फाइनेंसेस को चलाने के लिए, लोन्स लेने के लिए, सेविंग्स करने के लिए, डिपॉजिट करने के लिए आपको पैसे के बारे में वित्तीय ज्ञान आपका होना चाहिए. लेकिन ये हमारे देश में एक खासा वीकनेस है. इट इज नॉट जस्ट द वुमेन, हालांकि सभी में द फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी इन आवर कंट्री इज वेरी वेरी पोर. वी डू नॉट नो हाउ टू मैनेज मनी, व्हाट टू डू विथ आवर मनी. वी आर नॉट टॉट, whether in our school, colleges, we are not taught. Of course, it's a different thing, one can argue that, you take commerce and so on and so forth. But this is a basic financial knowledge that we all should have about the money. But the women all the more have been denied of such opportunities of having any understanding, any knowledge about the financial management or financial literacy. And therefore, in the absence of such financial knowledge, they will not be able to best effectively utilize the money, which will be generated in the self-help groups. So weak leadership, of course, lack of training causes group conflicts and reduced autonomy many a times, because they have not have the experience of leading, or collectively working. So obviously they will have these tussles and conflicts. But as I told you, there will always be problems whenever you are starting anything for the first time. But it is all through these struggles that you will evolve and you will eventually become better. So regional disparities. So it's not just the other problems are there, but अगर हम क्षेत्रों के, प्रांतों के दिशा में देखते हैं तो वो भी हमें देखने को मिलेगा कि सदर्न स्टेट्स में जो है देयर आर ग्रेटर कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ द सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स, वेयरएज नॉर्दर्न एंड ईस्टर्न स्टेट्स आर लेगिंग बिहाइंड. उसी तरीके से मार्केट एक्सेस बैरियर्स, स्ट्रगल्स टू एक्सेस लार्जर मार्केट्स, कांस्टेंट स्केलेबिलिटी. अगर हमें सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप को और ज्यादा बड़े व्यापक लेवल पे ले जाना है ताकि ज्यादा से ज्यादा लोगों को लोन मिल सके, बड़े बड़े वो अगर प्रोजेक्ट शुरू कर सके, कुछ इस तरीके का स्टार्टअप शुरू कर सके, तो उसके लिए हमें उनके स्केल को बढ़ाना पड़ेगा. तो ब्रॉडर मार्केट के साथ में उसको लिंक करना पड़ेगा. लेकिन इसमें कहीं ना कहीं कमियां हमें देखने को मिलती है. ठीक वैसे ही फंड मिसमैनेजमेंट इसका एक और भी महत्वपूर्ण या और भी एक जटिल समस्या है. पोर अकाउंटिंग प्रैक्टिसेस इरोड ट्रस्ट एंड सस्टेनेबिलिटी. और कई बार तो ऐसा हो जाता है कि कुछ ये जो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स हैं वो बीच में ही जो है वो टूट जाते हैं, क्योंकि वहां पे कुछ ट्रस्ट इश्यूज आ जाते हैं, फंड का मिस एप्रोप्रिएशन हो जाता है, फंड को बेहतर तरीके से चलाया नहीं जाता है. एंड देन ऑल्सो वी हैव द सोशियो कल्चरल कंस्ट्रेंट. सी, वी आर फंक्शनिंग इन अ सेमी फ्यूडल patriarchal mindset, patriarchal setup. In that patriarchal setup, it becomes extremely difficult and challenging for the women to participate even in the meetings of the self-help groups. And sometimes when they have to visit to the banks, and many times when they take the leadership, whether it is the secretary, president of those self-help groups, it becomes they will have to visit to the banks and other financial institutions. So many times the societal setup actually creates a lot of hurdles for the women. And therefore, this journey is not just only about financial inclusion and addressing other things, but it is also about breaking those barriers, breaking those patriarchal, setups. So this is going to be, in that sense, really, really radical in the coming days. And eventually, with all those, with all their efforts and with all the support coming from the progressive sections of the society, they will be eventually able to break all such barriers which has been put by the patriarchal society. Now we need the strategic reforms for self-help groups in that sense. Okay, we need to develop capacity, we need to enhance the market linkages, we need to have the robust monitoring system, regional expansion needs to be done. And similarly, gender sensitization, community campaigns challenge patriarchal barriers. If the patriarchy is limiting, women, we need to actually provide a more systematic and robust challenge against this patriarchy. And we need to, for that, do the, gender sensitization, campaigns. We need to make the citizens, we need to make all the segments of the society much more aware about these gender relations. Digital integration can be another way. So we need to enhance this, we need to do the scaling. For that, e-Sakti, such initiatives, the digital initiatives can be taken help of. Now, so we have discussed in detail, अभी तक हमने पूरे डिटेल में चर्चा किया कि कैसे सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप जो है एक गेम चेंजर है. एक शुरुआत उन्होंने, पहल उनके द्वारा हुई है, जहां सेवा से लेके अभी तक अगर हम देखते हैं तो these self-help groups have basically played a tremendous role in bringing about that transformation in the society, including the providing a financial inclusion to the women and contributing effectively to the idea of gender equality, and also to a great extent addressing the poverty and the inequalities in the society. Now, similarly, the NGOs are the pillars of inclusive development. As I already said, that healthcare, education and sanitation and so many other sectors. Okay, so self-help groups through financial management. So कई बार NGOs और financial self-help groups में साझा एक collaboration बनता है, क्योंकि NGO जो है self-help groups की जो कमियां हैं उन कमियों को दूर कर सकता है. कैसे? NGO उन self-help groups के सदस्यों को लिए विशेष तरीके का ट्रेनिंग का आयोजन कर सकता है, उनके फाइनेंशियल लिटरेसी पे फोकस कर सकता है, उनको जिस तरीके के स्किल सेट की जरूरत है उसके ऊपर में काफी ध्यान केंद्रित कर सकता है। और ऐसा करने पे क्या होगा कि वो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स के जो सदस्य हैं वो और भी बेहतर तरीके से उन प्लेटफॉर्म का इस्तेमाल कर पाएंगे और बेहतर तरीके से कंट्रीब्यूट कर पाएंगे। ओके। और जैसे कि हमने पहले भी कहा कि एडवोकेसी, एनजीओ जो है पॉलिसी एडवोकेसीज भी करते हैं, और आरटीआई और फॉरेस्ट राइट्स एक्ट के बारे में हमने ऑलरेडी जिक्र कर लिया है, राइट। लेकिन उसके साथ साथ क्या महत्वपूर्ण है, हेल्थ एंड ऑल दिस वी हैव डिस्कस्ड, land rights and environmental justice align with sustainable development goal 16, okay, and marginalized groups reduces inequalities. So NGO का contribution रहा है inequalities को दूर करने में, और जो कि हमारा एक sustainable development goal भी है। So if we want to become a developed state, अगर हम विकसित भारत बनना चाहते हैं तो जाहिर सी बात है हमें इन inequalities को दूर करना पड़ेगा, जेंडर इनइक्वालिटी को एड्रेस करना पड़ेगा, पॉवर्टी को हमें सॉल्व करना ही पड़ेगा। हाँ, तो ये सारे हमारे लिए जरूरी हो जाते हैं, और इस दिशा में राज्य के कदम के साथ साथ एनजीओ उन राज्य के साथ कदम से कदम मिलाकर जब काम करता है तो बेहतर सुचारू रूप से इस प्रक्रिया को हम अंजाम दे सकते हैं। और इस दिशा में हमने एनजीओ के काफी कंट्रीब्यूशन भी हमें देखे हैं, और ना केवल उस दिशा में बल्कि हमारे देश में ट्रांसपेरेंसी और अकाउंटेबिलिटी को बढ़ावा देने में भी एनजीओ द्वारा एक खासा योगदान देखा गया है। लेकिन कई सारे चुनौतियां हैं, तो वी विल ट्राई टू क्विकली रैप इट अप। आई होप यू हैव बीन फॉलोइंग विथ मी ऑल थ्रू दिस डिस्कशन, और आप लोगों के फीडबैक्स के कारण से हमने, मेरी तरफ से ये कोशिश रही है कि मैं इसको बाइलिंगुअल करूं। सो आई हैव मेड ए वेरी सिंसियर एफर्ट to make this entire discussion in a very bilingual mode. So I hope you have been enjoying this discussion. So if you are enjoying, if you are liking this discussion, please do like the video and do leave your comments. Whatever is your comment, whatever is your feedback, just write a few lines and I will read all of those comments, trust me. So your comments will act as an inspiration to all of us to continue to do this good work and come with more innovative ideas so as to help you in your preparation journey. So finally, let me come to the challenges and recommendations for the NGOs. Funding constraints limit scalability and sustainability. You see, NGOs often rely on the fund, and many times this fund limits their effectiveness also, because many times they have certain conditionalities attached, so there are strings attached. So in the era that our youth generation may be talking about no strings attached, the NGOs will get the fund with the strings attached. So when those strings are attached, their effectiveness, they cannot focus on some of the areas where they would probably like to work. So it limits their success. ये उनकी पूरी सफलता को कहीं ना कहीं सीमित कर देता है, क्योंकि उनके पास फ्री फ्लो ऑफ फंड नहीं होता है। दूसरे तरफ FCRA जो अमेंडमेंट हुए हैं उसके तहत भी फॉरेन फंडिंग पे कहीं ना कहीं बहुत ज्यादा अंकुश लगाया गया है। So there has been greater check by the government through this FCRA amendment, which has also dried up the sources for the NGOs, making it all the more difficult for them to carry forward some of their developmental programs. Political interference and capacity gaps, कई बार जो है कैपेसिटी गैप्स और पॉलिटिकल इंटरफेरेंस, राजनीतिक दखलंदाजी एनजीओज के काम में, और खास करके उन एनजीओज में जिन एनजीओज का काम सरकार को या जो भी सत्ता में है उनको अगर उनका काम थोड़ा सा भी क्रिटिकल रखता है तो हमने देखा है कि कैसे एनजीओज को हर तरीके से परेशान किया जाता है, और ये जो है कहीं ना कहीं एनजीओ के इफेक्टिवनेस को कहीं ना कहीं सीमित कर देते हैं। ठीक उसी तरीके से कई बार कैपेसिटी गैप भी देखने को मिलता है। आज के दौर में, टेक्नोलॉजी ड्रिवन दौर में, अगर एनजीओ खुद इतने सक्षम नहीं है, खुद वो टेक्नोलॉजी के ऊपर में अगर काम नहीं कर रहे हैं, खुद वो टेक्नोलॉजी के माध्यम से अपने पूरे फंक्शनिंग को ट्रांसपेरेंट नहीं बना रहा है, फॉर एग्जांपल ब्लॉकचेन टेक्नोलॉजी का इस्तेमाल करते हुए अगर आप पूरे ट्रांसपेरेंट तरीके से अपने फाइनेंसेस को मैनेज नहीं कर रहे हैं, तो जाहिर सी बात है दिस प्रॉब्लम्स विल लिमिट योर इफेक्टिवनेस ऑल्सो। अकाउंटेबिलिटी डेफिसिट एंड कोऑर्डिनेशन चैलेंजेस, कई बार जो है द एनजीओज ऑल्सो नीड टू बी अकाउंटेबल। हालांकि हमने ये पूरे डिस्कशन के दौर में इनके पॉजिटिव पॉइंट्स कहे, बट एट द सेम टाइम देयर आर ऑल्सो प्रॉब्लम्स, नॉट दैट ऑफ कोर्स the NGOs have been doing a very significant, very a wonderful role in our country. They have provided voice to the voiceless populations of our country, and they have actually provided them the help when probably even the state failed Okay, so they have in that sense bridged that gap most effectively. But having said that, there are also problems in the functioning of many of the NGOs. Many NGOs have been allegedly been found, there have been allegations of fund misappropriation, money laundering. Many NGOs have been alleged to be involved in the money laundering. So all these are, critical problems that needs to be addressed. Now, what are the recommendations? Okay, robust financial policies ensure, transparency. So robust financial policies, and the greater financial transparency with regard to the NGOs becomes central, because then only the people's faith in the NGOs will also get enhanced. Okay, diversified funding through government and private partnerships. As I already told you that if there is only one source of funding, it will always limit the effective functioning of the NGOs. So therefore, in order to overcome that problem, NGOs actually need to diversify their funds. Okay, their sources of their funding needs to be diversified, so that they do not rely, or so that one source dies up, there is another source. So when they will have multiple sources of funding, they will be able to more effectively carry the projects to their logical conclusion. Okay, ट्रेनिंग एनहांसेस टेक्निकल एंड मैनेजरियल स्किल्स. उनके टेक्निकल और मैनेजरियल स्किल्स को बढ़ाने के लिए एनजीओ के लोगों को विशेष तरीके का ट्रेनिंग, प्रशिक्षण देने का जरूरत है. उसी तरीके से एफसीआरए रिफॉर्म्स को कैसे बैलेंस किया जाए. जाहिर सी बात है, हमारे देश की सुरक्षा, संप्रभुता, ये सारे महत्वपूर्ण है, लेकिन इसको करने की प्रक्रिया में ऐसा ना हो कि कहीं ना कहीं एनजीओस के बिल्कुल ऑटोनॉमी को खत्म कर दिया जाए. क्योंकि हमें यह भी मानना पड़ेगा कि अभी तक एनजीओस ने बहुत ही एक सकारात्मक सहयोग हमारे पूरे इस डेवलपमेंट जर्नी में, और खास करके उन मार्जिनलाइज तबके के लिए बहुत ही एक सकारात्मक भूमिका उन्होंने निभाया है. तो हमें इसको एक्नॉलेज करते हुए एक मध्यम मार्ग अपनाना पड़ेगा, जैसे हम कहते हैं मध्यम मार्ग बुद्धिस्ट फिलोसॉफी में, या फिर एरिस्टोटेलियन कॉन्सेप्ट में भी एथिक्स पेपर में हम पढ़ते हैं, टू अवॉइड एनी ऑफ द एक्सट्रीम, एंड वी हैव टू फाइंड दैट मिडिल पाथ. So NGOs coalitions, basically amplify impact and share resources. So let us finally come to conclude, the entire discussion. I hope you have liked, and if you have liked, please do like this video and also do leave your comment. Okay, I would look forward to have your comment. Now, conclusion. Self-help groups and NGOs basically drive inclusive governance. As I have already pointed out, that they have played a significant role in the promotion of sustainable development in our country, and they have greatly championed the idea of inclusive governance. They have made the governance in the true sense inclusive by involving, by giving space to the poor and the marginalized sections, by offering them a platform through which they could participate in the governance process. So their roles in empowerment, advocacy and service delivery has actually bridged the state society gap, or the state and citizens between the gap between the state and the citizen has effectively been bridged by their various initiatives. So addressing corruption, funding constraints and disparities. So as we know, we have said that there are problems. So by addressing all the problems pertaining to the self-help groups and the NGOs, basically we will be able to enhance their effectiveness, their success. Stories will get more strengthened. So grassroots efforts basically ensure citizen-centric governance, strengthening democratic trust. So collaboration and innovation will amplify their impact. So NGOs and the self-help groups actually function in the greater collaboration. Okay, as I already been talking many times, I have been emphasizing that it is not just the time where we only compete with each other, but we also need to learn to collaborate with each other. Okay, these are the eras where we are not just only competing, but we are also effectively collaborating. So they also need to basically focus on collaboration and innovation to be successful. Now the self-help groups and non-governmental organizations have emerged as pivotal actors in advancing inclusive governance and sustainable development in India. Their role in empowerment, advocacy and service delivery effectively bridges the persistent state society gap, as I have already pointed out. Finally, what I can say is that strengthening the ecosystem of self-help group and NGOs basically will not only address the immediate developmental concerns, but also play decisive role in shaping resilient, inclusive and participatory India. So we want to basically establish an India which is developed, which is Vikshit, but at the same time an India which is not just Vikshit with some of the sections of the society being developed. So the gap between the rich and the poor needs to be addressed. So we need to ensure that when India progresses, all the society, all the segments of the society actually progresses. When India develops, all the sections of the India, okay, so that this development doesn't become lopsided. This development has to be balanced. This development has to be, sustainable. So it is in this context that the self-help groups and the NGOs can play a very instrumental role by bridging the gap, by fulfilling the gap which is left by the initiative and interventions by the state. Of course, in our country we have the conception of a welfare state, and it is the responsibility of the state to take care and protect the interest of the poor and the marginalized society. Our constitution has also emphasized on it. Directive principles of state policy makes it it gives the direction to the state to work in that direction, to apply those principles in the governance, so as to address those economic inequalities, so as to cater to the needs and aspirations of the poor and the marginalized sections of the society. And the state has a responsibility. But even then, with all the efforts of the state, there may be certain gaps which may be left. And this gap which has been left by even after the initiative by the state can effectively bridged by these self-help groups and the NGOs, and therefore they have a tremendous potential to become a partner in our developmental journey and contribute all the more effectively, bringing about a radical change in our society, creating truly a society which is based on justice, just as per the mandate of our constitution, which actually talks about the establishment of a just society. Okay, so with this note, I would like to conclude today's session. I hope you have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. If you have enjoyed this discussion, I would finally, once again, before concluding the session, would like to request all of you to like this video, and most importantly, please do leave your comments. Your comments are really important to all of us, and personally I would really appreciate if you just leave your comments. So with that note, I would like to congratulate all of you for watching this session and being with me so far. I will continue to do the subsequent YouTube live sessions in the coming days. Till then, all of you take care and continue to prepare well for your mains. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.